Hi and welcome to Bootstrap Quickie, the fastest and sexiest way to build responsive websites using Bootstrap with me, Gopalakrishnan. In this one-of-a-kind web development course, I will show you exactly how to use one of the most popular CSS frameworks, Bootstrap, to build responsive, gorgeous websites in no time. Although I am not a certified web developer, I have spent the last 15 years building websites with HTML and CSS. In today's competitive world, I think everyone should know at least the basics of building a responsive, mobile-friendly website. The good news is, learning this stuff is not as difficult as it used to be. Bootstrap is the easiest way for you to get started. It's a web design framework that is used by thousands of sites, including some of the popular sites you visit every single day. With Bootstrap, you can create clean, cross-platform sites that are 100% mobile-friendly in a matter of minutes. All you need is basic understanding of HTML and CSS to get started. When I created this course, I wanted to keep it simple yet make it so good that it would blow all the other courses out of the water. I knew I had to create something special, so I spent weeks putting together everything you'll need to not only learn Bootstrap but master it in the shortest possible time. As a result, this course is different in 5 major ways. Number 1. I've built a gorgeous Bootstrap template that you can play around with, reverse engineer and reuse for your own website building project. This template took a week to create from scratch, and I've incorporated as many real-life elements as you'll need to start your own site or page. You'll be able to see Bootstrap in action and check out the code to understand how the parts fit together. Everything is built in sections, so you can easily copy only the parts you want, or you can even move things around. Number 2, and here's a big one, I also include 16 snap-on themes that you can use with the course template to get a professional looking design with zero effort. Just change a single line of code and the template I've provided will transform before your very eyes into the sexiest thing you've seen. You're free to use these templates on your own website and customize it any way you want. I know beauty is a matter of taste, but I'm pretty sure you'll find at least one theme in here that you can fall in love with. Number 3, I provide code snippets that you can just copy and paste to create your own page in Bootstrap within a matter of minutes. I've separated all the common elements of Bootstrap into HTML files that you can refer to over and over again without having to constantly flip through the confusing examples on the official Bootstrap site. You can easily mix, match and combine the snippets to create complex layouts for any need, regardless of whether you're trying to design a website, a blog, or the user interface for an application. I've got you covered. Number 4, this course is slow paced and easy to follow. I break everything down into small, digestible lessons so that anyone can understand what I'm doing and follow along, even if you've never heard of Bootstrap before. Because I have a business degree instead of a web development one, you'll also find my explanations less geeky and more, well, let's say, useful. Number 5, I always go the extra mile. Complete this course and upload your certificate of completion, and I will give you an awesome bonus for helping yourself. Plus, I'm always around to answer your question, give you more advanced examples of using Bootstrap, and even share some valuable resources that will help take your web development skills to the next level. So go ahead and enroll in this course right now. I'm 100% sure that you will not only learn a ton of useful stuff, but have fun in the process and achieve things you never thought possible. See you in the course discussion area where I'm ready to help you get started. So in this course, I've decided to do something radically different. What I've done is basically I have created an awesome ready-made template that you can see here, and I've included this as part of the course materials, so you get the exact template that you see here absolutely free. And as you can see, this is a gorgeous template and it has all the elements of Bootstrap. It has the navigation bar with icons that I am using font awesome actually. So the navigation bar has all the drop down menus, search, static tags. You have the Jumbotron or the main headline over here, and as you scroll down you also have testimonials, because this is a really important part of any website, client testimonials. and you have a full width image carousel over here that allows you to display screenshots of your product or any other gorgeous image on your website, and this scrolls automatically. And then you have also some of responsive elements. For example, you can embed a responsive YouTube or Vimeo video on your website that will automatically scale according to the size of your screen and makes it perfectly compatible for mobile devices and tablets as well. You can put embedded maps, for example, a location to your office or your warehouse or whatever. You can put in responsive tables, and I've gone to great lengths to make this template as real as possible in such a way that you can just copy and paste every single element that you see here and create your own gorgeous website with Bootstrap. And as I scroll down, you'll have more common elements that almost everyone would need to put on your website to highlight the features of your product or your app or your company or your event. And then you have thumbnail images as well. You can easily swap these images with any other image of your own and it will look awesome. And again, I've gone to great lengths to make it as real as possible, so I've included some buttons, button toolbars, drop downs or drop ups, almost anything I can think of that you would need in your actual website, as well as pagination over here and more elements. For example, a blog post with a responsive thumbnail image, a simple ordered list, a fancy ordered list with some really cool icons here, and other examples of what you can do with the default or vanilla installation of Bootstrap. And you have some collapsible groups or accordions over here, buttons that once you click on it will perform a certain action. For example, open a pop-up or a modal window, and in this case display an error message or success message or anything that you want to. Again, I will show you step by step how to do every single thing that I have created on this template, but the template itself is ready for you to use right away. Next, we go to pricing options, sign up, and this is another common thing that you need to use on your website. And finally, the footer section where you can put in your company's address, email for people to contact you, display your latest blog post, and also embed live tweets from Twitter. And let's top that off with a copyright notice on your website. So as you can see, this is a gorgeous website that will scale and respond automatically for mobile devices. But here's the best part. You have up to 16 themes that I have included in the course materials, and it's so easy for you to just switch between themes. So if you don't like the one that you see here, no problem. You can have other themes that look like this, a darker theme, or you can have a flat design theme in dark color, or even a flat design theme in a lighter color. And you can have so many different variations. You will definitely find a style that you like to use. I personally like a minimalist theme like this, which is also included, of course. Or you can get a bold theme for your Bootstrap site. You can get so many different variations in here. And of course, I also include the vanilla or unstyled version of Bootstrap so that you can put your own custom style or CSS and make it look however you want it to look. Hi everyone, and welcome to the course. Well, first of all, I want to explain the tools that you need in order for you to participate in this course. So it's very simple. You don't need web hosting, you don't need to set up your local host or whatever. All you need is a really good HTML editor, and the rest of the files, well, you can edit it directly on your desktop and you can preview and you can do whatever you want. So now let's talk about HTML editors. I understand there are hundreds of HTML editors out there, and personally myself, I've used Dreamweaver for the longest time. But Dreamweaver is, well, it has all the features that you would need, but in this course I think about 99% of those features we don't really use. So you can go with the most basic HTML editor that you want. Now I'm going to give you two recommendations over here. One is for Mac. So if you're on a Mac like me, you can go to panic.com/Coda and you can download Coda 2. Coda is a really simple, clean HTML editor with a built-in preview, so that makes it really easy for you to work with the course materials that I provide in this course. So Coda is not free, but there is a free trial, and if you want to buy Coda later, it will cost you about $99. But the free trial should be about 30 days, which I think is more than enough for you to follow through with this course. If you're not on Mac, you're on Windows, then you can also try Notepad++. So that is at notepad-plus-plus.org. Or you can go with any HTML editor that you want. Again, this course is really simple. There's no need for you to upload or download any files. You just do everything locally in your computer, and that's how we're going to learn. So that being said, let me show you why I choose to use Coda for this course. So this is how the general interface of Coda looks like. So you can set up your sites or your projects in Coda to make it easy for you to reference later. So the course materials that I've given you, you can set it up like this, and when you double click on it, you can view all the files in that folder, and then you can open any individual file that you want. So this is how Coda looks like, and I will explain in a separate video how to set it up to look like the version that I'm using, so that it will make you more comfortable throughout the rest of the course. But very quickly, well, Coda, it allows you to edit HTML without any interruptions, so it's really lightweight and there's no lag, and everything is color coded over here. So the proper syntax is used for the different elements like div tags or comments or even CSS, and that makes it easy for you to digest this and also to read this enormous amount of code that you see over here. And the beautiful thing about Coda is that it has a built-in preview function that works really well. So I can click on preview here, and I can look at the entire site, and it works exactly how it's supposed to work, even with all the script or the JavaScript, and that makes it easy for you to work faster. Now, if you're using Notepad+ or any other HTML editor that doesn't have a built-in preview feature, then you can always open the course file in your browser window and make some changes in your HTML editor, go back to the browser, Chrome or Safari or whatever, refresh that to see the changes. But of course, this makes it much easier. And that's not all. With Coda, you can actually preview on a separate window like you see over here, and that's really cool because when I make changes, I can see the effect of those changes instantly. For example, if I just change the name of the CSS file, and you can see instantly at the bottom here, I can see the effect of what I've just done. And this instant feedback, I feel, is really good for new people who are new to HTML. It helps you to recognize if you've made any mistakes, of course, but it's also instant gratification for you to see what's really happening as and when you type in the code. So that's all you need to follow with this course. You just need a very good, or at least a basic HTML editor. Again, it's Notepad++ for PC or Coda for Mac, or any other HTML editor that you're comfortable with. In the next video, I will show you how to set up Coda with the course file so that you can start editing HTML and creating beautiful Bootstrap sites quickly. Okay, so in this video, I want to show you some basic tips on how to use Coda. Again, it's not very complicated, but perhaps you'd want your environment to look exactly like what you see in the video tutorials. So once you've set up Coda, the first thing you can do is set up a site. You don't have to do this, but it makes it easier for you later on to start working. So click on the plus icon here, and for the name of your site, just you can put whatever you want. I'm going to put Bootstrap course over here, and next select the local root. So you can click on set and then choose the location of the course files that you have just downloaded. Okay, so this is the course file over here. There's a template site and there's also your project, but you can just use the main folder or the main enclosing folder over here and click on select to set that up. Now click on save. Okay, so the site has been set up, and when you double click on that site, you can see all the files of the site in the right hand section here. In the sidebar, you can see the files in your site, which is the course materials that you have been provided. So to start using the files, you can just double click on any of those files over here, and what Coda does is it opens a thumbnail of the site or the files that you're working with right on top. So if I open two files, I can easily switch between both the files by clicking on the icons over here. Now to be more advanced, of course, I don't really like to look at the icons over here. So for the rest of the course, what I'm going to do is I am going to remove the icons. So I'm going to click on text only. So they will look like this. But if you still want to see the icons, you can click on small icon and text. So you get something like this. It doesn't really matter, actually, it's really up to you. But I do this just to save some space to be able to show you better. Now the next thing that you can do is, if the text is too small in Coda, in the Mac environment, you can click on Command plus or Apple plus or whatever you want to call it. So when you click on Command plus, the text actually gets larger, and that makes it easier on the eyes, easier for you to look at what you're doing. And you can click on Command minus to make the text smaller. Now the color scheme of your editor may not look like mine, and by default, of course. So if you want it to look like this, then you got to go to Coda and click on Preferences, and under Preferences, click on Colors, and then you'll be able to select your style sheet. So by default, I think it comes with Coda Bright, something like that. If it looks like this, now this is way too bright for me, so you can just change it to whatever you want over here. And the one that I'm using throughout this course is called the Panic Palette. Okay, and there's also one in gray called Special Spot. So let's switch back to Panic Palette. Now if you don't see an option for Panic Palette over here, it means probably you don't have this palette in your local installation of Coda. So what you need to do is click on Plugins, okay, and then you can click on Get More Coda Plugins. That will bring you to the Coda website with the plugins, and on this page you can click on Themes, and here you have tons of themes, tons of stuff for you to choose from. Okay, so now let me get back to Coda itself. Okay, so this is how I set up Coda, and to create a split preview window like what you'll see throughout this course, you have to click on this small plus icon over here, and now you'll see some options for create a new document or preview, or new untitled, terminal, or book. So I'm going to click on preview, and now you have the split window here for the preview. And this is how I choose to do the course, because I want you to be able to see the real-time changes as you are typing in the HTML, and I think that makes it really, really fun. You can click here at the divider, and you can move this up or down to resize the window, and you can also move this window to the left if you want to, but I recommend that you just leave it like this. It's the ultimate or the optimal way for you to actually start editing the HTML files that I provide in this course. Okay, so that is the basic how-to for using Coda, and let's get on with the rest of this course to actually create and learn on Bootstrap. In this video, I'm going to show you your course files and how to actually get started throughout the rest of this course. So once you set up Coda and you have your site set up, okay, double click on the site. So you would see two folders here, template site and your project. Template site is, well, exactly what it means. It's just a template, and I recommend that you don't actually edit on the template site itself. It's just for your reference. So it comes with index.html and template.html, and there is a folder with images, okay, and that folder contains all the sample images that I have used throughout this course, and also all the icons that you see on the page itself. Okay, so you have lots of icons. I'll be adding more icons later on, and there's a folder called assets as well. So this is where all the CSS style sheets, the fonts for Bootstrap and Font Awesome, the JavaScript files, and also all the themes are located. Now let's collapse that again. So this is just for your reference, the template site, but all your work will be done in the folder called Your Project. So under Your Project, you have a duplicate of what you see here. Assets is contains all the same files over here. Images contains all the same files as the template folder, but Your Project folder also has snippets. So this is a very handy way for you to get the necessary Bootstrap codes, HTML codes, for you to be able to build a website very quickly. So these are all snippets for accordion, button group, button single. I think it's self-explanatory over here. Now I could of course direct you to the Bootstrap website to get those codes, but that's really, well, it's really a pain in the ass because not all of the Bootstrap documentation or the sample codes that they show you on the website is complete. Some of them are overly complex. So the ones that you have here is just very simple, basic codes, just enough to get the job done without all the extra bells and whistles. Okay, so the blank file here, let's preview that. So all it says here is a blank slate for you to build quickly. And that's exactly what the blank file is for. So when you want to work on different elements, for example, if you want to build a navbar, you can copy or you can open blank.html and you can go to the HTML view of it, and now you can click on File again and you can save as. Okay, so you can save this as anything you want, but you'll always start with this basic blank file. Okay, now let's go back to the template side because this is where all the interesting stuff is. Let's click on index.html. Now let's click on preview, or you can click on preview in a new window at the bottom here. So this is your main Bootstrap files. It has all the common elements that are used in Bootstrap. It has the navbar, a search option here, some static text in the navbar. It has some Font Awesome icons, drop down for the navbar with a span, a label as well. It has the jumbotron, okay, and you have well, simple elements of a testimonial using default Bootstrap classes like block quote. Okay, next you have full width carousel, and you can click on the carousel itself to slide to the next images. And you have, well, let me make this just a little bit bigger. Okay, and then you have normal tab. So these are tab elements and you can click through it. So within these tab elements you also have the responsive video, which actually resizes according to your browser size. You have embedded maps and responsive tables with labels and some sample dummy data over here. Okay, and you have image-based content blocks, and this is a very common element to use on any website. You have thumbnails, okay, thumbnails over here, and the thumbnail buttons, sample buttons using button toolbar and button groups, and also a drop up, which is a variation of drop down for Bootstrap. You have the pagination, and you have more elements like page header for Bootstrap. You have the breadcrumbs, the lead paragraph, an image that has some of the CSS classes in Bootstrap to make it look like a thumbnail, which is also responsive. You have some basic paragraph text. You have a simple ordered list and a fancy ordered list that is using fonts from Font Awesome, and you have some sample on what you can achieve in Bootstrap. Over here you have the collapsible group, and here you have sample buttons, but the buttons does really it's really more than just a button. If you click on it, it collapses, or actually it expands to show you an alert message. Okay, this is just an example of what you can do in Bootstrap, what I will teach you to do in this course. And of course, no website is complete without pricing and sign up options. So I've constructed this 100% using Bootstrap, nothing else. Next, you go to the footer section, which has got your address, contact email, some stuff about your company, some sample blog post titles, and also an embedded live Twitter widget that shows all your latest tweets. And finally, at the bottom, you have the copyright section of your website. Okay, now let's go back to template site and let's look at the other file that is included in template site. Let me click on this template site, which is template.html. Okay, so template.html has all the elements that you see on the Bootstrap website. Okay, all the buttons in all the different colors, all the tables, different variations of tables, thumbnails, labels, badges, drop down menus, nav bars, alerts, progress bars, list groups, panels, wells, carousel, etc. So between these two files, you already have all the sample codes that you will ever need in order for you to create your own website with Bootstrap. Now let's go back to index.html. Okay, so the one thing that you probably notice is that this is just the vanilla version of Bootstrap, or the default version of Bootstrap without any additional styling. So where are all those additional good looking Bootstrap sites that I showed you in the previous videos? Well, it's all here actually, but it's all been commented out in this section that you see here. So if you want to preview this exact template with different themes, all you need to do is uncomment the section here, delete, and this is the beauty of Coda, is that you can see the changes instantly. So I've gone through a great lengths here to make sure that I created a template site that looks good in all the themes, all the 15 or 16 themes included here. Okay, and these are all the other themes that you can use. Now you can just change this to, you can uncomment the rest of it as well, but you can just follow the names that you see here and you can change it to whatever you want. So I'm going to change it to the Cosmo theme, and now this looks beautiful. This looks like some kind of material design website. Again, every single element will look different, everything will look different, and that's the beauty of using a CSS framework like Bootstrap, is that it's so easy to customize your site. Once you've set it up with Bootstrap, all you need to do is add your own CSS or your own style. So some of the really cool styles that you can see, well, I guess beauty is really a matter of taste, but these are the ones that I like. Darkly, okay, and that has a really dark theme. It looks good, it looks gorgeous actually. And as well as flatly, and this is, well, if you know what flat design means, this is an example of Bootstrap with flat design. So no gradients, nothing, just flat, simple, bright colors. And others like paper, okay, paper, and readable. Okay, so readable is really got big bold fonts. Again, it's really a matter of taste. You can add it in whatever you want, and some of the examples I will show you with using some of the themes, but most of the videos I'll show you just using the very basic vanilla version of Bootstrap. So I'm going to comment this out again. Okay, so we will stick to the vanilla version of Bootstrap for a lot of the examples, but I just want you to know that anytime you want, you can just uncomment any of these options here to have a much a better looking version of Bootstrap, and it's really up to you. Okay, so those are the cost files. Again, if you've set it up properly, you will see template site, index.html, HTML template. This is only for your reference, as I mentioned before, but your project, and this is where you'll be building your site. So every single thing you want to do, you will start with blank.html, you'll open blank.html and you will save it immediately as something else, and then you will start building the different elements and finally build your complete website. Okay, so let's get on with the rest of the course. The CSS layout method that I use in this course, because I know a lot of people would want to get their own look and feel. So although I've included the default Bootstrap style and about 16 different themes, but there may be some instances where you'll want to just modify the elements just a little bit. So how do you do that? So let's go back to the course here, and as I mentioned, you will be working under your project, okay? But let me just click on index.html to explain how I've laid out the CSS. So the CSS style sheets, I've commented everything beautifully over here, and also some tips on what's happening in the different sections. But let me explain anyway. Okay, so the themes that I got are all from Bootstrap, and those are all free themes that you can go to www.bootswatch.com and you can download those modified Bootstrap CSS yourself. It will look exactly the same. All the Bootstrap themes that I've included here is 100% original. I've not changed anything. Right, so the first, if you understand CSS, then you know that any CSS element that you include later on in the document will override the ones that come before. So I've included Bootstrap, the basic vanilla version of Bootstrap CSS first and foremost right on top, and then I've included Font Awesome. So if you happen to change the location of any of the files, then you may want to modify the path to those files over here. Next come the Bootstrap themes. So as I mentioned, you can uncomment any of these themes to do whatever you want with it. Next comes start custom CSS. Your own theme overrides all of the above styles. So as I mentioned with CSS, the CSS style sheets that you declare later or will actually override the declarations of CSS that you made before. So now, for example, if I want to use readable, let me uncomment that. I'm going to uncomment readable. Okay, and let's preview how it looks like. So this is the readable theme, okay, in Bootstrap. So you can actually comment out the vanilla version of Bootstrap if you want to. Again, if you are actually pushing your site to live, you don't have to include all the CSS styles that you see here. This is just for practice. So you can comment out the vanilla version of Bootstrap or not, it doesn't really matter. Okay, and then comes your own custom CSS. So let's uncomment this one. And custom CSS is a blank file, it's a blank slate for you to modify anything that you want to modify. And that is located, of course, on the assets, and under themes you would see custom.css. So if you double click on custom.css, it's a blank slate and you can put in your styles over here. Okay, let's go back to index.html. So when you specify any styles under custom.css, those styles will override the Bootstrap themes that you see here, and it will also override the vanilla version of Bootstrap. Okay, next comes inline CSS. So this is useful if you just want to apply slight modifications to a style on that page only. Then you may want to just specify the CSS on that page, and that's where inline CSS is useful. Again, since this is declared further down the document, so this style sheet that you see here will override your custom CSS, and it will also override everything that comes above. Alright, and finally is the CSS style that you apply to the elements themselves. So this will override your inline CSS, and this will override your in-page CSS, and also override everything else. So that's how you do it if you want to make small changes while you are going through this course. Again, this is all for your convenience, and when you actually decide to push your site to live and build a site, then you would not I wouldn't advise to do the CSS on each and every page, but instead you can put it all into one file called custom CSS, and then you can choose any of this, okay, delete the rest of it, and you can even delete the vanilla version of Bootstrap. So it's really up to you, and for the sake of doing the exercises, I recommend that you don't mess around with this and you just uncomment the ones that you want. But when you're pushing to live, then go lean and remove all the unnecessary stuff. Now let's get on with the rest of the course. In this video, I want to explain the different versions of Bootstrap and also give you an introduction of the Bootstrap website. Now throughout this course, I don't really go much to the Bootstrap website, but it's very useful to know how to navigate through the Bootstrap website to get some of the more advanced stuff if you want to, and also to refer to the original documents and maybe look at what are the latest changes in Bootstrap. So the first thing I need to mention is that there are two versions of Bootstrap that are really popular online right now, and that is Bootstrap version 2 and just Bootstrap, or Bootstrap version 3. So Bootstrap version 2 is still in use. I use it for some of the applications as well. This is how Bootstrap version 2 looks like, and if you Google for Bootstrap or you go to getbootstrap.com, this is how Bootstrap version 3 looks like. Now it's okay for you to use Bootstrap version 2. In fact, for most cases it works perfect, but the main difference between Bootstrap version 2 and Bootstrap version 3 is that in Bootstrap 3, the creators of Bootstrap decided to revamp everything to make it mobile first. And that is a significant departure from Bootstrap 2, because the thinking with Bootstrap 2 was about how to build a site, or how to create a CSS framework for websites, and then modify that to cater for mobile devices. So the default version of Bootstrap 2 comes with a non-responsive theme, and then you can add on a different CSS file to make it responsive for mobile devices, including tablets. But with Bootstrap 3, the main focus here is on mobile devices, and you can disable the responsiveness. Everything in Bootstrap 3 is responsive by default, which means that it will automatically resize or modify itself based on the size of the screen and also the type of mobile devices that you're using. Okay, so what we are talking about throughout this course is Bootstrap 3. Just in case you get confused and you end up on this site, there's a lot of differences in the CSS and also the structure of Bootstrap 2 and Bootstrap 3. So don't make the mistake of trying to use Bootstrap 2 or referring to this site. You should refer to this one that you see here. Okay, now with Bootstrap 3, which is at getbootstrap.com, this is the main site. So you can read a lot about Bootstrap here, and you can download Bootstrap, and this is only the basic simple version of Bootstrap. You can also follow Bootstrap on GitHub, and you can click on view GitHub project over here, and through the GitHub page, when you download it through the GitHub page by clicking on download zip, you actually download the master files of Bootstrap, which contains a lot of stuff, including some of the stuff that is totally useless for you in terms of trying to build a site, and a lot of the stuff that are still in testing phases and so on. So I recommend that if you actually want to download Bootstrap, you can just download the basic version. But again, to follow throughout this course, you don't need to do this. I've already downloaded Bootstrap and included it throughout your course materials. Now don't download the latest version of Bootstrap and replace your course materials version with the latest version. Some things may not work. But generally speaking, if there's a lot of difference between what I provided in the course material and the latest version of Bootstrap, I would have updated the course material, just to be clear on that. Now in the Bootstrap website, you can click on Get Started. Okay, so this is basically an explanation of how Bootstrap works, how to install Bootstrap, and well, you can see a lot of complicated stuff, the basic structure of Bootstrap. Okay, you can click on CSS. So under CSS here, Bootstrap really highlights the basic stuff about how to use Bootstrap, how to call or how to format your HTML document, the different how the grid system works like. So you may find this useful or not, but I will do my best to explain whatever you see in this website in a non-technical and as a way that is as fun as possible. Okay, so if you find this confusing, don't worry, you don't really need to read this stuff. So over here you have some navigation items. So for forms, you can get the basic CSS for creating a basic form and advanced examples like inline form. Okay, now let's go up again and let's click on components. So under components, you have the different types of elements or objects that Bootstrap uses. Again, you can click on the navigation that you see here. So you click on drop down and it gives you an example of a drop down button and variations. So really you only need to go to the Bootstrap website if you just want to find out the different variations that you can use to even create more advanced versions of what I've provided in the course. Next, under JavaScript, well, these are also components, but the difference between components and JavaScript is that the components that are listed under JavaScript would require you to include the Bootstrap JavaScript in order for it to work, whereas stuff that you find on the components or CSS would work just by using HTML and CSS. Okay, so there's some elements here as well that you can click on, and then you can click on customize. So this page actually allows you to download a customized version of Bootstrap. This is if you want to run lean in an actual live website or application, and if you decided that you don't want to use some of the elements here, you can uncheck those elements. For example, glyph icons, well, we don't really use it in the course, we use Font Awesome, but I have included it anyway because the course is just for practice. So the version that you have in the course actually is a complete version that has, well, everything. But just in case you want to customize and download a smaller version of Bootstrap, you can do it here. Okay, so that's all for introduction to Bootstrap. And again, remember, if you find yourself referring to this version of Bootstrap, this is an older version that is not covered in the course. We refer to Bootstrap version 3, which you can get at getbootstrap.com. In this video, we're going to get started with Bootstrap by understanding the basic structure of Bootstrap, which is the grid system used in Bootstrap. So on the Bootstrap website, to get more information on the grid system, you can click on CSS, and then you can click on the grid system over here to understand more. But I will explain in a much simpler way how this grid system actually works. But let me show you an example. With Bootstrap, and this is one of the websites that I've developed myself, using the grid system in Bootstrap 3 to be exact, you can very easily control the way your website looks like on a desktop and as well as on a tablet or on a mobile device. So using the Bootstrap grid system, everything looks good because everything is aligned perfectly. And you may not realize that at first, but your eyes know the difference between something that is perfectly in alignment as opposed to something that is even a few pixels out of alignment. So you can see it's a really good clean template over here, but with the Bootstrap grid system, you can segment or you can create components of your content, different types of content, embed a video, whatever you want, and this will scale automatically when your visitors are from a mobile device or on a tablet or any other smaller screen. I'm going to show you what happens in the Bootstrap grid system. So for example, when someone visits my site from a tablet, which is roughly about this size, and you can see right now instantly the changes that happen, and you go smaller and you can see that you can control Bootstrap to be very specific in such a way that you can show a completely different layout for mobile users or iPad or even smaller screen desktops. Okay, and one thing I like to highlight here is that the grid system in Bootstrap is not about just collapsing stuff, collapsing the divs or collapsing the elements on top of one another as your screen gets smaller, but you can specify something that is the best result or the best layout for a screen. So I want you to pay attention to this section here, where for desktop the best option will be to, of course, put it 1, 2, 3 side by side over here. But when the screen gets smaller, I don't really have space for displaying it side by side. So as for a tablet, this is still okay. But now you come to a mobile device, and as the screen gets smaller, I prefer to put it like this instead of side by side. And this is what we're going to learn to do in Bootstrap using the grid system of Bootstrap. And the other thing is that you can also display different buttons, different elements, everything you want. It's more work, of course, but it makes sure, or it ensures, that your visitors will have the best experience if they are from a mobile device. The last thing you want them to do when they visit your site from a mobile device, which more and more users are starting to do, is to have difficulty navigating your site or to be stuck trying to click on buttons that are designed for a desktop experience. So now let's get started with the actual course material. You can go to Coda and open the site, okay, and in your site documents over here, I want you to open up blank.html, and we're going to save this blank.html as something different. So I'm going to save it as, let's call this grid.html, GRID, and click on save. Okay, now let's open the preview window to see exactly what happens when we start working. So all you see now is a blank slate for you to build quickly. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to build the very basic element of Bootstrap, which is a complete grid for you to display content. So you can select this and delete it, and you can select the paragraph as well and delete it. Okay, let me make the fonts larger so it's easier to see. So to create a row in Bootstrap, what you have to do is get started with a div tag, assign a class to it, and we're going to call this class as container. So the container is the uppermost level for layout. Now once the container has been created, we're going to create another div inside of it, and we're going to call it, we're going to assign the class to it as row. So in Bootstrap, or in most grid designs, this is the basic structure. You have a container, and then you have your row, and in that row you can have multiple columns. So in Bootstrap 3, the class for column is col-md or -xs. In Bootstrap 3, unlike in Bootstrap 2, there's different classes for different screen sizes, but in most cases we can start with div class call, and you can see the options appear here in Coda that is actually from the Bootstrap CSS. So there's tons of them here. So LG is for column large. This is for really wide screens, okay, and then as you can go down here, you have MD, which is for medium sized screens, and you also have column SM, which is for smaller screens like tablets, and column XS, which is for really small screens like mobile devices. So we're going to go with column MD. So we're going to type dash MD, and now you want to specify the width of the column. So in Bootstrap, each row is divided into 12 columns, and no matter what you do, the total columns in each row must equal to 12. Let's start with the basic example here and put 12. So that will take up the entire row, and I'm going to close that div over here. Okay, so this here is the basic component of a Bootstrap page. You have a container. Inside the container you have a row, and inside the row you can have as many columns as you want. In this case we've gone for column MD12, so there's 12 columns. Now let's try typing something here. Okay, so in the preview you can see the text hello world here start to appear. Okay, now let's split this row into two sections. So what we're going to do is we're going to only use half of the row by changing this to column MD6. Okay, and let's create a new div and give it column MD6 as well. Remember, the total columns in each row must be 12. Anyway, you can see now that you have hello world over here and you have hello again over here. Now, to make it easy for you to see exactly the size of the columns, I would recommend adding some color to it. Okay, so I'm going to put here style. Okay, I'm going to put background, color. Okay, and I'm going to okay, so now you can see the actual color here, and that shows you how wide this div is. Let's copy this style and put it in the next column as well. Okay, so you have 6 columns here and 6 columns here, and that makes up 12 columns for the entire row. And the row is, of course, the size of the row is determined by the container. So in Bootstrap, there is an additional class for container. If you want to make your website or your web page stretch from end to end of the screen, you can use container fluid. Okay, so when you change to container fluid, and you can see the difference here, it's end to end. But I don't recommend using container fluid unless you're designing for an application that is actually end to end. For most websites, people don't read the screen from end to end, they only read what's in the middle. So I don't recommend using container fluid, but it's there if you need to use it. Okay, so now we're back to the main row. Now let's try something different. What happens if we want to split this row up into 3 different sections? So I'm going to copy this again, and I'm going to paste it here. So now that we have 6 columns in a row, you can see that the last column automatically goes down. Okay, so that's how Bootstrap works. It can only accommodate 12 columns in one row. Everything else will be put or will be moved downwards. So if you want to have all these columns in a row, if you remember or you were listening, the maximum you can have in each row is 12 columns. So 12 divided by 3 is 4. So you can change this to 4, change all of this to 4, and here you have 3 columns in a row. So this is the basic of the Bootstrap grid system. You have container that specifies the size or the maximum width of the content area, and then you have a row, and in the row you can specify different columns. So you can even change this to 6 columns. I'm just going to copy that, and I'm going to paste it again and again and one more time. Okay, so now we have way too many columns in a row, and what happens is it gets placed down, okay, or it gets moved downwards, and there's nothing wrong with it, but let's make sure that we have only 12 columns in a row, and that means each of these columns is going to be 2. Okay, and here we have 6 columns. The width of each column is 2, and that makes up for 12. So go ahead and give this a try in your own exercise files, and of course you can just copy the code from the snippets, and you can do that, but I would recommend that you try typing it in manually like what I've done here, and that will help you to learn much faster. Okay, in this video I'm going to show you how to put one row inside another row to make it a nested row. So in Bootstrap, as I mentioned, you have the container and you have a row, and then you have your columns, and each row can support in one row here, or one line, a maximum of 12 columns. But that being said, you can create nested columns or nested rows in Bootstrap, and that may be useful in some cases. If you have a more complex page layout, you may want to actually have a different element in each of these columns, and make sure that each of these elements also are using the grid system. Now let me delete some of the columns over here, and I'm going to start back again with column 6 and column 6. I'm going to change the color a little bit so that it will be easier to explain this. Okay, so now you have your 2 columns, one is light gray and one is dark gray. So to create nested columns or nested rows in Bootstrap, you have to be working inside of the current column. For example, this column MD6. Okay, let me create another row inside that column. So I'm going to type div class equals to row. Okay, I'm going to close that tag, and just like any other row, this row can also fit up to 12 columns. So I'm going to create 2 columns in this row. And I'm going to select column medium 6. Okay, and let me duplicate that, copy and paste. So now inside this column here, hello world, you have another 2 more columns. Okay, now let's add some text. Okay, so here's the main column, and you have your first column and second column as nested columns within the main column. Okay, if this is not clear, let me put a color to it. Okay, background color, and okay, so you can see the difference here. So here you have one column, which is 6 medium columns in total, and inside it you have a nested columns, and the width of this is 6 and the width of this is 6. So that's how easy it is to create nested columns in Bootstrap. So in this video I'm going to show you how to create offset columns in Bootstrap. First, let's get back to the basics, and let's get rid of this nested columns over here until we get back to just having 1 row and 2 columns. Okay, so the reason you may want to use nested columns is sometimes you may not want the content to start all the way at the very left. You may want it to start slightly in the middle. So there's one very easy way to do it in Bootstrap, and that is by using offset columns. To create an offset column, first create the column that you want, column MD6, okay? And after the class called MD6, let's add call MD, okay? This is for medium-sized screens, and let's put a dash and go to offset. So you can see in Bootstrap you can offset your columns from 0 all the way to 12. Okay, and one thing that I have to mention here is that the column for medium or large can only be offset by offsets for medium or large. What I mean is, if you have used column medium 6, then the offset must also be column medium offset, okay, 6. And you can't use column MD or column LG offset 6 when the main class here is column MD6. Alright, so something strange has happened over here. What you can see is that the first column, which is 6 columns in a row, now has moved all the way up to here and pushing the other the other column down. Why that happens is because we have specified to offset this column by 6 columns. So although you can't see it here, but it's actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 columns, and this column here starts in the 7th column. As for why this column gets pushed to the bottom is because at any given time in the row you can only have 12 columns. So this actually is using 12 columns. You have 6 columns with the actual content and you're offsetting it by 6 columns, and that's why this div column gets pushed to the bottom. Now let's make some changes over here. Let's make the width of the primary column, or the column with the content, let's change it to 4, and now you can offset the column by 4 as well. And you'll see that the column has not only shrunk in size, in the width of it is now smaller, but it has also moved a little more towards the left. So what happens is that now the column width is 4 and it's offset by 4, but this column here still gets pushed to the bottom because the total of 4 and 4 is 8 plus 6 is 14. So we can change this to 4, and now everything is beautiful in a row because the total of all the columns, even the offset column, at any given time must equals to 12. Now let's try another example. Let's say I want the content of the column to be 6, and I can offset this column by 3, and that's still not right because the total is not 12. So what should the other column be? 3? Yep, you guessed it right. In fact, you can even delete the other column and it doesn't matter, because this is how Bootstrap works. It counts your columns, the main column here, and it knows that this column has to be 6 and the offset by 3, so it pushes the content by 3 columns, and it already knows that there are 3 columns at the end here. Even if you don't enter any content, the main div tag that you're working with, as you can notice with the background color, it does not push all the way to the right. It only sticks to the 6 columns here, and there is 3 columns in this area here and another 3 columns for a total of 12 columns in one row. So knowing how to offset your columns can be very useful. Let me give you an example, a real life example from my website. So here is my website, and you can see the video here. Okay, now I put this video in a row, but I did not make it 12 columns because that will make the video too big. So what I've done is I've put the video in only 6 columns, but I have offset it by 3 columns. So there's a space of 3 columns over here and space of 3 columns over here, and that makes the video in the perfect size to be on my website. And this is one of the examples of why you would want to use offset content. It can also be useful for headlines, for example. So if you have a long headline and you put it in 12 columns, it will wrap all the way from the left to all the way to the right, and that makes it really difficult to work with. You can instead offset the columns, so that will make the possible width of your headline within a more readable area. Okay, so that's all for using offset columns that I have explained in this tutorial. In this video, I'm going to show you how to build a Jumbotron using Bootstrap. So Jumbotron is a specific class in Bootstrap that allows you to create the headlines section of your website or your page. But in this course, every single column is actually using Jumbotron, and that is intentionally because I want to highlight everything boldly. Okay, but what we're trying to do here is this text, bold text that you see over here. So let's get started. Now go to your course materials, start with blank, of course, and let's save this blank, save as, and let's save this as Jumbotron. Okay, make sure you save it under your project, and let's preview this. Okay, so it has some default text here that we can very quickly delete. I'm going to delete the paragraph here, and I'm going to make this bigger. Okay, and let's create a preview window right at the bottom. Now let's start creating our Jumbotron. So the first thing you need to do is put in the basic grid structure here. I can type this from scratch, but I've already explained the grid structure in a different video. So I'm going to go to snippets under my project files. I'm going to click on grid, and this is the basic grid structure over here. I'm going to Command C, copy that. I'm going to go back to Jumbotron, and I'm going to paste it over here. Okay, so now let's preview, and you have hello world over here. So let's build a Jumbotron. So in order to build a Jumbotron, you just need to create a new div class equals to Jumbotron. Enter. Let's close that div tag, and let's close that div tag after the words hello world. Okay, so here you have your Jumbotron. Now you need to change the hello world into a h1 tag. Let's put h1, and close the h1. So you have hello world, and right below that I'm going to enter a sub headline, and I'm going to put that in header 2. Okay, and let's type in some text. Let's create an awesome Bootstrap project. Okay, and let's close the h2 tag. Alright, so let's check back with our example file. Let's start an awesome Bootstrap project. Okay, I'm going back to Jumbotron. So this is actually in header 3, or you can even use paragraph. So I can change this to a normal paragraph text and close this with paragraph. So here you have your Jumbotron hello world. Let's create an awesome Bootstrap project. But as you can see, it's not the same as this. This is in the middle, and it's full screen from end to end. Let's solve that. Let's go back to Jumbotron. Okay, and now to align your text right in the middle, you can use a default Bootstrap class to align text. Go to the div class Jumbotron, and after Jumbotron space and type in text, and you can see the different classes in Bootstrap allow you to modify the text. To make the text in center, you need to use the class text center. And there you go, the text is in center. You can add other classes as well. For example, if you want to capitalize this, you can use the class text capitalize, all right, and that is capitalized. Or you can use text uppercase to make everything in this div uppercase. All right, so now we're closer to this, but it's still not full width. So this is the basic use of a Jumbotron, and you can use it for many different elements of your site, but I prefer to make the Jumbotron wide, end to end. And in order to do that, you have to make the Jumbotron div as the main div before the container. Okay, so let's remove Jumbotron and let's just leave text center. Now, in order to make it easier for you to edit the stuff, as you can see, the code keeps getting longer. What you need to do is click on the class here, the main class that you want to work with, and right click or double click or double tap in Mac and choose fold current block. Now that folds everything in a single line, so it makes it easy for you to understand where you need to enter your new div. So I'm going to enter a div before the container. I'm going to call it div class Jumbotron. Okay, I'm going to close that div. Oops. I'm going to close that div right under here. Okay, so what happens is that here we are declaring the div Jumbotron first, and the container along with everything else inside the container, which is the row, the 12 columns and the text center, everything comes inside the div Jumbotron. So that's how you get a full width end-to-end Jumbotron that looks exactly like this. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to work with heading tags like h1, h2, h3 and so on using Bootstrap. So as usual, we will start with blank.html and I would save this as headings. Okay, now you see the default text over here. Let's change this default text into a paragraph by adding the appropriate paragraph tags to it. Okay, so now you have a paragraph, and with a paragraph you can highlight the first sentence or the heading of the paragraph by adding p plus lead to your paragraph, and this sort of enlarges the text that you have selected. It also makes it a little bit bolder. So this is really useful for lines of paragraph, as I mentioned, to highlight the first sentence. This can be a form of heading. You can use it in place of an actual h1 or h2 tag. Really depends on the situation. Now let's change this to a h1 tag, which is for header 1. Okay, so in Bootstrap, if you know basic HTML, you can go from h1 to h2, h3, 4, 5 and 6. h1 to h6 is supported in Bootstrap. There's a specific class for all those headers to control the size, the boldness of the text, etc. But we're just going to work with h1 for now. I'm going to show you a few options to style your h1 tag. So within the header tag, you can select a section of that tag to make this a sub of the header 1 by adding small. Okay, this makes the text smaller, of course, but it also changes the color of the text. Okay, that's one neat little trick that you can do. Now you can also add the h1 tag into a special div which is called div class page header. By assigning the class page header to this div, you're basically creating more padding around the h1 tag, and you also add a border, okay, to the div class page header, and you add a little bit of margin right below that border to push everything else a little bit downwards. And this is useful when designing a page. For example, you may want this to be the title of your blog. Let me show you in the template that I provided in the course materials where we use stuff like this. Okay, so this is an example of the h1 tag. This is also the h1 tag, but I've added the attribute small to it. Alright, so this is a h1 tag. This is the small attribute added to the h1 tag, and this entire thing is in a page header. Now let's go back to headings. Okay, so you can assign different colors to your h1 tag by choosing the appropriate class, text, okay, you can change it to text info, text success, okay, and all the other default classes like warning or danger. You can also add classes very quickly to your h1 tag to capitalize the text, okay, or to make everything in uppercase. Within the page header, you can always add h3 as a smaller or subheading. Close that. Okay, so let's try one final thing here. What if you don't want the text to be aligned to the left? You want it to be aligned to the middle. In the div class of page header, just add the class text center, and everything is automatically aligned right in the middle. So that's how easy it is to work with heading tags in Bootstrap and create good looking pages by using page header, and also by adding different style options to your heading tags. In this lesson, I'm going to teach you how to use Font Awesome. So with the default or vanilla installation of Bootstrap, Bootstrap includes a type of icon that you can use called glyph icons or glyphicons or whatever you want to call them. Okay, so let me just go to Bootstrap and show you what I mean. Okay, so you can go under CSS, you can go to components, and right under components you will see glyph icons. Okay, so these are the available icons that you can use very easily in Bootstrap. But generally speaking, whenever I design anything, I don't use the Bootstrap ones because it's quite limited. Okay, and you would need more options when you want to create more unique buttons. So most people I know use Font Awesome. To get Font Awesome, you can just Google Font Awesome. First result that you see here, fontawesome.github.io/Font Awesome. So let's click on Font Awesome. So Font Awesome is an additional script that you have to include into your pages in order to start using them. And let's look at the icons offered by Font Awesome. So there are a total of 519 icons. That is great, and that's also bad news, as I will explain later. So basically, by using Font Awesome, there are a few advantages that you have over the default Bootstrap fonts. First, of course, is there are tons of options of the icons for you to choose from, and second is the icons are better for mobile devices or high resolution or retina screens because they're not images, right? They're just text that have been modified to look like images. And the third advantage of using Font Awesome is that you can have if you click on examples in Font Awesome, you can style it much better than the default icons in Bootstrap. Okay, you can increase the size very easily just by adding an additional class, and you can put it into list groups, list icons. You can create a border around those icons, you can animate them, you can rotate them, you can stack them up, and there's lots of things that you can do with Font Awesome. So now let's get back to our course files. You click on your project and you'll find Font Awesome already inside your course files, and the actual fonts or SVG files used by Font Awesome are also in your course files. So when you refer back to Font Awesome, if you try to look for a font, click on icons and you can actually search for the font that you want here. Take note that there are always new fonts being introduced in Font Awesome. So if you search for a font here and you try to implement that in the course materials and those fonts are, you can't find those fonts, then most probably you would need to update those files. Okay, fontawesome.min.css, and all these files need to be updated. It's very easy to do, however. So now let's start with actually creating an icon with Font Awesome. Okay, so let's minimize this and let's start with blank.html. Going to save it as icons. Okay, going to split the window to preview separately. Alright, so I'm just going to leave the default text without any grids or containers because what we are really focusing on is the icons themselves. Okay, so Font Awesome can be applied to a text, it can be applied to a button, it can be applied to a list, it can be applied to images, it can become images if you make it large enough. It can be applied to almost anything. In this case, we're just going to apply it to a basic text over here. Alright, so let's delete this and type in Font Awesome. Okay, and now the basic, let me make this as big as I can. The basic method to implement Font Awesome is to use the I tag. So in older versions of HTML, the I tag was used to italize text, but generally speaking, most people don't use I anymore, and they use EM to italize the text. So Font Awesome is using the I tag for CS in HTML to implement their fonts. So you need to type in I and then you go to class. Oops. You need to type in I and then you go to class. Okay. Okay. So to start with, you need to first call the basic Font Awesome CSS, which is FA, and this is the fundamental or the foundation level of all Font Awesome fonts. Next, you would specify the actual font. Okay, so it's pretty hard to remember the names of the fonts. There are over 500 fonts. I do remember some, however, so I'm going to type in FA home. Okay, and I'm going to close that, and I'm going to close the I tag. Alright, so you see here very easily you can see Font Awesome. This is perhaps a bit too small, so instead of using a paragraph, I'm going to use a H1 tag over here to make it very easy for you to see the actual font. And this is the home font. So you can change this to anything you want. Okay, And to be honest with you, I get confused with the way Font Awesome has named their fonts, and therefore you will always probably need to go back to Font Awesome, click on icons here, and try searching for the fonts. You can browse through the fonts, but it's generally, well, if you have the time, then sure, go ahead and you can browse through all the font. So for example, if I want to create a button that says next or previous, I type in next. Okay, you may find some options that you can use over here. Okay, so let's say arrow right, or let me just type in arrow. Okay, so I have tons of options for arrow, and I am going to use arrow circle up. Click on that, and Font Awesome will give you the exact CSS that you can use to class. Copy that class and go back to your course materials over here, replace the I class with the actual font, and there you have it. Okay, you can actually just type anything you want, because in the course materials, as you can see here, we've already linked up Font Awesome to the actual files. So all the styles would appear under the drop down list for suggestions over here. Okay, and that's one way to do it, but again, there's just too many fonts. You may have a better time going to Font Awesome and looking for the font that you want. Now let's look at styling this font. Okay, so remember, Font Awesome is basically, it's not an image, it's just a text that has been modified to look like an image, and therefore any class that you can apply to a text will also apply to the Font Awesome fonts. What you need to do is, once you've declared FA and then you space and then you've declared the actual font, now let's space again, and now we can use some of the default text styling options in Bootstrap, okay, which is text success, text warning, text danger, text info. So let me just put in text info. Okay, and this has changed to blue, and I can put in text success, it has changed to green. All right, and you can also specify your own colors in Font Awesome. If you don't like the default colors, all you need to do is type in your own style, and type color. Okay, and in Coda, you have some default colors over here, but you can choose, click on color picker, and then you can fine-tune your selection of the colors here to, you know, whatever you want. So if I want something really bright red, I can go all the way to the end, and Coda will automatically select the color code for me. All right, so that's the basic Font Awesome. Now let's talk about making the fonts bigger. Okay, so in Font Awesome, it's very easy to make the icons bigger. Once you have declared FA and space and the actual icon name, then you can put in the size. So it's FA is the default size, and then you have FA 2x, 3x, 4x, and 5x. Let's start with 2x. Okay, that makes the font twice as big. Actually, it looks more than twice as big, but let's try 3, 4, 5. Okay, and this is what I mean. The font or the icon for Font Awesome can actually replace some of the images you may want to use on your website, and that is beneficial in the sense that since it is not an image, of course, you don't have to worry about the image size or the loading speed. It loads almost instantly, and it is text, so text will scale very beautifully in all types of screen, all screen resolutions. And now let's talk about two other styling options you can use for your font. You can put a border around this font. Let me just change it back to 3x. So to put a border, just type in FA-border. Alright, now you have a border around your font. Alright, one more, and now let's put FA-spin. Okay, and now your font is actually spinning around. Well, this image, I guess, is not so suitable for to be spun around. Let's put, okay, And let's remove the border. Alright, nice little animation here, and this is incredible because there are no images being used for this. It's just JavaScript, it's just CSS, it's just HTML. So that's how easy it is to start using Font Awesome all over your page or your website to create really good, gorgeous looking fonts that are so flexible you can use them anywhere you want. Okay, so in the previous lesson, I've explained how Font Awesome works and how to use Font Awesome on your website. Now let's move on to creating lists with Font Awesome. Alright, so with the default Bootstrap, whenever you create a list, whether it's an ordered list or unordered list, you cannot apply an icon to every single list item. But with Font Awesome, you can, and that's one of the other advantages of using Font Awesome. So let's get started. Go to your project files, and you can see an example of what I'm going to create here under list icons. So if you're in a hurry, you can just swipe this, just copy the entire thing, change out the links and change the icons. But since we're trying to learn anyway, let's start with the blank file. I'm going to open the blank file, and I'm going to save this blank file as list. Alright, save it. I'm going to make the fonts bigger, and I'm going to create a split preview window over here. Alright, so now we're not going to put in any of the grid classes because we're just going to focus on creating the ordered list. Alright, first of all, I'm going to remove the paragraph class text center over here. I'm going to make it the font a bit bigger, so I'm going to put the Bootstrap class of paragraph lead. Alright, and now I'm going to delete the font, or maybe I'll just add it right at the bottom here. So let me create the basic list, unordered list, UL. Let's close the UL over here. Now let's add a list item. Okay, and let's close that list item. Let's create a few list items. Okay, so this is the basic list that you can create, and as you can see, it looks kind of boring. So let's add Font Awesome to it. The first thing you need to do for your unordered list, you need to declare the class of fa-ul. Okay, alright, now you can see it looks a bit different here. The dots have disappeared. And now let's create the icons on the individual list as well. So here's how you do it. Just use the default class fa check. All right, and let's close that. Okay, and now let's copy that to the other list items. Alright, so you can see the list items here now appear with a checklist, so it looks like a checklist, and that's great. However, there's one other class you need to add. Okay, just after fa, let's add fa.li. Alright, and that actually positions the list or the icon much more accurately within the list. So this looks fine, but what happens is when you have a text that is too long, okay, when you have a text that is too long, it will wrap underneath the icon, and that's not what you want to happen. You want the text to start at a slight indent away from the icon. So by adding FALI, that is the correct class for each list item. Okay, so you can add FALI to all the other list items. And there you go, you have your basic, beautiful list item with Font Awesome. And any other class of font awesome, you can also just easily apply it to the list item. So you can make the fonts bigger, well in this case it's hidden, and let's apply that to every single list item. Okay, which is not probably a good idea since it doesn't really appear very well, but you can also style it with different text classes. Alright, that makes it blue. Here let me put text danger, and I'm going to change this to times. Okay, so this is a example of maybe some of a list of features or benefits. Maybe you want to compare your product to a competitor's product, and this is a much better way to do it. All right, so that's all for this lesson, where I have explained how to create a very beautiful unordered list using Font Awesome to get to be able to put in any font or any icon that you want to each list item over here and make it really pop, make it really stand out. Hi, and in this tutorial we are going to create a wonderful looking testimonial, as you can see from the template that I have given you in your course materials. So a lot of this tutorial will be focused on the image part and how to effectively use and style images with Bootstrap, and then we'll move forward to creating the actual testimonial, which is the easy part actually. So let's get started and go on to your Coda application, go to the course materials, and let's open your project file. As usual, we start with blank, and now I'm going to save this as a new file. I'm going to save it as images. Okay, and now let's preview that. So we want to get rid of the default text over here as usual. Okay, so I'm going to just go down. Let me make this bigger. Okay, so I'm going to delete these two lines over here. Now I'm going to go back to the course materials. I'm going to go to snippets, and I'm just going to start with a basic grid. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to go back to images, and I'm going to paste the basic grid over here. Hello world. There you have it. Now let's get started with images. In Bootstrap, you would create, or you would place an image just like you would with normal HTML. Image source. Okay, and the good news is that I've included lots of images in your course materials, and all you need to do is find those images, which should be in the images folder. Okay, so you're going to type in images, and okay, let's select avatar 01. Let's close that tag and let's save this file. So now let's preview again. Let me open in a new preview window at the bottom. Okay, so you see the image over here, image gravatar 01. So this is a basic image in Bootstrap. Now Bootstrap allows you to add some very cool customization to your images, and those are using the img class in Bootstrap. So to select those classes, type in class img. Alright, so these are the 4 classes available by default in Bootstrap: img circle, img responsive, img rounded, and img thumbnail. And you can actually apply multiple classes to the same image. So let's get started with img thumbnail. Okay, so what this class does is that it adds slight padding all around the image and rounded borders around the image. Makes it look kind of retro-ish, if you know what I mean. Okay, now let's apply another class to it, img, and we're going to go with image circle, or let's try image rounded first. Okay, so that doesn't have much of an effect on this particular image. So let's try IMG circle. Okay, and now you see your image in a complete circle over here. Alright, so let's see what are the other classes you can apply to it. So you can put IMG responsive, and this makes the image responsive. So for an image this size, you normally don't need to make it responsive because it's too small anyway. But for a larger image, you should apply the responsive element to make sure that the image does not break out of the screen when your visitors are viewing your site in a mobile device or iPad or any kind of smaller screen. Okay, so this is a basic testimonial image that you can see in the example over here. Now let's try a different image. Let's try a larger image, much larger image. Okay, so I'm going to select the image again, images / and I'm going to use one of the carousel images, and these images are huge. Okay, so I'm going to select image carousel 1, enter, close it. Okay, so as you can see, this image is huge, right? What happens is that it takes up the entire screen. Although I've specified that it's 12 columns over here, but this image is too big. So let's apply the class of IMG responsive to it. Okay, and now the image, as you can see here, now the image has automatically resized itself to fit the entire 12 columns. Now if I were to put 6 columns instead of 12, you can see how well Bootstrap has designed the responsive part of images. Okay, now let's make this image link to a website or any external page. So let's create the link over here, href, and let's put in google.com. Okay, and let's close the e tag. Okay, and now let's check out the image here. So as you can see, this already links to google.com. Alright, so this image is fully linked to google.com, and whenever someone clicks on it, it goes to Google. So anyway, this is the basic styles that you can use for your images. And of course, you can apply all kinds of classes to it. You can even do your own custom style, but by default there are 4 classes in Bootstrap, which is image thumbnail, image rounded, image circle, and image responsive. Now let's get started with buttons. So buttons are one of the key features of a Bootstrap site, and buttons appear almost everywhere, from the toolbar to a sign up button. You can even use buttons as tabs, and you can use buttons for hiding a drop up or drop down menu. You can use buttons for almost everything. So let's start with a simple basic button, and there will be something like this. I'm going to show you how to create a very basic button, and then from then we'll move on to creating button groups and also creating button toolbars that contain several button groups. So let's get back to the course files over here. Let's open up blank, and I'm going to save this as buttons. Okay, and now let's open up a snippet for grids. You can of course find all the snippets here, but you know, this is of course after all a course, so let's learn how to do it manually. I am however going to copy the grid. Okay, and I'm going to come back to buttons.html. I'm going to replace the paragraph here with a complete grid. And I'm going to create a split preview window, and as usual I'm going to make the fonts here bigger. Is that big enough? Alright. So let's get to creating a button. So in Bootstrap there are two ways you can create a button. Well, actually you can apply a button class to almost anything, but the two most popular ways are to actually use or to actually create a button, or you can convert an ordinary link, HTML link, into a button. And I prefer creating buttons from links because it's way more flexible that way. I can make it link to any other page that I want, and it looks exactly the same as adding a normal button in HTML. And since a lot of my work is about creating the mockup or the user interface for web applications that we want to develop, creating buttons as links really helps me tremendously to move fast. Okay, now let's start creating a button. So what you need to do is create any ordinary link, href, href, oops, okay, http, and let's close that tag. Okay, so now you see an ordinary HTML link, and we are going to convert that into a button. So all you need to do is add the class of button, which is btn. Okay, and next you got to select the type of button. So there are several options for you to style your buttons, and the most common is to apply button default. And there you go. Now you have an actual button, and since we created a button from a link, alright, and we can actually make this link to within the page and external site, whatever you want. Now there's one more thing that you have to do here, and Bootstrap recommends that you do it, which is to assign the role of a button to this link. Okay, there are no noticeable differences in terms of appearances, but in terms of the correct methodology of doing this, if you specify the role as a button, then other elements in Bootstrap will be able to recognize that as a button. Alright, so now that we have added the class button, button default, and role equals to button, and it looks like a button, it functions like a button. When you click down on it, you can see the differences. It's almost as if you are actually clicking down on a real button. Now let's try different classes to make this button look different. So buttons comes in 4 colors in Bootstrap. Well, other than default, I'm sorry, 5 colors. So Bootstrap recommends that you use the button primary. And why the word primary here? Well, this is because buttons actually have a function, and by assigning the role of or the class of primary to it, you'll be able to create a primary action on your web application. For example, if you have a page and you want the sign up button to be the primary button, and the opt-in to or subscribe to our list to be the secondary button, then the primary button will actually be a bit more outstanding. Okay, and the other reason for this is that if you consistently stick to button primary for all the primary functions of your page, then later you can easily style this primary button to be red or purple or black or whatever you want to. Okay, but let's look at some of the other classes. Okay, so there's button info, and this is supposedly, well, actually used for info, for additional information. Now there's a button warning. Okay, and this is almost like saying, hey, if you want to click on this button, you better be careful. And next there's button danger. Button danger is like, if you click this button, everything is going to self-destruct. Okay, it's the ultimate warning, and so it's red because, well, psychologically, I think when we see red, we are a bit more cautious. I don't know how true is that. And actually, anyway, you're free to use any color that you want to. If most of the buttons on your site are red, then you can just use button danger for everything, or you can use button primary for all the primary function buttons and then style it in your Bootstrap CSS to be red. Now there's another type of button here, which is button link. So button link, it looks, well, just like any other HTML link, all right, but it does have additional features that you can use when you create the role as a button, which is you can put it into groups and toolbars, which I will explain about that later. Now let's look at the different button sizes. Let me change this back to button primary. Okay, so there are different button sizes that you can use, and the one that you see here is actually the default size. So you can assign button.lg. LG is for large, and that makes the button large, as you can see here. All right, and you can assign button SM. That makes the button a little smaller, or if you want a really tiny button, you can put button XS, and now that's a really tiny button, almost looks like a label. So those are the four size classes that you can play around with. The defaults, of course, without any additional class for the size. And of course, before I forget, there's one more additional thing that you can do for a button, is that you can make it a block. And to do that, type in btn-block. Okay, a button block will span from left to right for the entire length of your column or whatever containing element that you happen to put a button in. So if I were to change this to column MD1, then the button will only span for one column. Let's change this to column MD2. All right, so button block again, end to end, left to right, across the entire column or whatever element or div it happens to be in. And this can be useful in some cases, and in the lectures or in the tutorials for creating different versions of your site for desktop and for mobile. I will talk more about using button block, because it's really useful when you are dealing with small screen sizes to make sure that you have a consistent layout of buttons throughout your site. Okay, now let's add one more thing in our button, which is an icon. Okay, so I am using Font Awesome, which I explained in a separate lecture. Okay, now you have the shopping cart icon over here, and I'm going to change this from hello world. I'm going to change this to sign up now, and I am going to change it to the large button. Okay, and here you have it, the button that looks exactly like the one you see here. So that's all for this lecture, and in the next lecture I'm going to talk more about buttons, but we're going to go deeper. We're going to create button groups and button toolbars. Okay, let's continue from the previous lecture. So we created a very simple button like this, and we saved it as buttons.html, so you can open up that file. And now let's start creating button groups. Okay, so let me just copy this entire thing here and paste it to create two buttons. And I'm going to change the column to 6 to leave some room for the buttons. All right. Or let me just change that to 12. Makes it easier. Okay, so now I've created two buttons, each with the context class of primary and the size of large. Button LG, I've added the role of buttons to both of the buttons, and I've added some icons here. Okay, let me just change the text Okay, and I'm going to change the icon. Okay, so what you have now are two buttons, and it's very obvious that these are two separate buttons because of the space in between those buttons. So what we're going to do is, let me change the color of the context of it, to button default. Okay, and now what we're going to do is make this into a button group and get rid of the space in between, and also make those buttons join seamlessly. So to do that, we have to add the div class of button group. Okay, button group, and let's close that div right after the second button. Okay, so now we have a button group, and you can see now this is way slicker than having two individual buttons that look like they are just next to each other but not necessarily within the same action or the same toolbar or whatever. Now we have a button group, and let's look at adding more buttons to the button groups here. So I'm going to add a third button. I'm going to call this delete. I'm going to add the context of danger to it. Danger. And okay, right, nice. Sign up, back home, and delete. So with button groups, you can actually add as many buttons as you want. It all lines up nicely like this. Now let's look at what other classes that you can use for your button group. And since I have created the course materials and I have put in all the Bootstrap CSS, that will be very easy for you to do. Just type button dash group, and now you can see a few other things as well. Okay, button group justified, button group LG, button group small, button group vertical, button group extra small, and you can ignore the rest of it. So what happens when you click on button group justified? It will span end to end of the entire column if you place it in directly in a column, or whatever element that you happen to place it in. So if I change this to 6 columns, so now you can see it's end to end of the column, and all the text of the buttons or the size of the buttons will automatically adjust itself to flow from end to end. And also because of we put in the class of justified, will automatically adjust itself to be justified. Now let's look at some other classes that we can apply here. Button group vertical, and this stacks the buttons up in a vertical format. Okay, now let's look at the button group sizes. Button group LG, button group SM. Alright, so you can assign a class to individual buttons to indicate the size that you want. In this case, for all 3 buttons, I have put a class of button dash LG, but in the button group I've put the class of button group small. So this actually is the primary way of styling the size of the buttons in a button group, and whatever you put here is ignored. Okay, so I can change this easily to LG or SM. Alright, but I can't change it to button group default. That's the only thing here. So if I want to change it to default, then I have to remove the classes for the size. Alright, so now we talked about button groups, justified button groups, and also vertically stacked button groups. Now let me make all the buttons bigger because I'm sure you're straining to see what I'm doing. Alright, now how about going further, going more than this? What can you do if you want to put 2 button groups? Alright, so let me collapse this. I'm going to copy this button group, and I'm going to put another button group. Alright, and I'm going to change the column size to 12. Okay, and in this one I am just going to use two buttons, right? And I'm going to collapse this button group again, and I'm going to add another button group. Okay, so you're watching this and you're thinking like, I don't need so many buttons. Yeah, you most probably don't need so many buttons, okay? But if you are designing a specific type of toolbar, for example, maybe player controls for a video or some other element on your site, you may want to have a lot of buttons. And especially when you talk about just using icons for those buttons, not really using tags, so that makes more sense. So just using icons, and I have buttons over here. So now one easy way to control this 3 different button groups is to enclose it in a larger, or in a div for button toolbar. Oops, sorry. Div class button toolbar. Alright, so now you have your button toolbar, and you're thinking, yeah, that looks exactly the same as, you know, it would without a button toolbar, and that would be right. But you, by putting it in a button toolbar, you can actually do a few things over here. Number one, you can align some of the buttons to the left or to the right. Okay, so you know what, there are too many buttons here. I'm going to delete one button group. All right, let's just do 2 button groups. Now for this button group, I want to align it to the right, and in Bootstrap you can align anything to the right by adding the class pull right. All right, and now you see that this button group has been pulled to the right, and this one is still on the left. According to the Bootstrap documentation, the proper way to style this is also to add role toolbar to the button toolbar, and for the button groups you have to add role equals to group. Okay, you don't have to do this. I always forget to do the small stuff like this when I'm just designing the user interface, but eventually this gets added in by our developers. Okay, so if you're just trying to do a rough sketch of a rough mock-up of the site that you want to build, you don't have to go to all the lengths to make sure it's proper. Okay, you can leave it out. It doesn't really matter much. All right, so now before I end the section on buttons, I forgot to talk about 2 additional things you can do with a button. Okay, which is you can assign the role of active to it. Now let me change all the buttons to the same context, so it will be easier for you to see the difference. Okay, to make a button active, you may want to add active to the button, and this tells the user that this is the option that they have selected at the moment. Okay, now while a button is active, the user can still interact with the button. Okay, you can still click on the button. So if you don't want that to happen, then active is not the right class to use. Okay, and what you need to do is make the button disabled, and to do that, type in disabled. Oops, this. All right, and now the button is completely unclickable. It's redundant. There's nothing you can do with the button. Well, actually the right way to do it is disabled equals to disabled. All right, that's the same thing, but this is the right way to do it. Now let me give you a real life example of how you would want to use button groups. Right, so here is the application user interface that I developed for one of our software, which is Link Tracker. So I use a lot of button groups in this. I'm sorry, button toolbars and button groups as well. So what you see here is a button toolbar, which consists of 3 different button groups. 1, 2, and 3. So the reason really for using button toolbars is to create some kind of easy navigation that you can easily align. So you can align some of it to the left and some of it to the right, and you can create a button group for related functions. All right, so in this case, this is to click on reports, and that is a separate function, and this all this stuff is to create something new. Okay, and here is for the settings. And another example would be right when you want to create just 2 buttons, all right, but you want those buttons to be aligned to the left or to the right. Using button toolbar is one way to do it. You can also just create 2 different buttons and assign the class of pull left to one of it and pull right to one of it. All right, so I hope you enjoyed this tutorial on how to create button groups and button toolbars in Bootstrap. Okay, in this lesson I'm going to teach you how to create some of the miscellaneous smaller elements in Bootstrap. Okay, for example, pagination over here, the breadcrumbs, okay, and maybe even a list item like this. It all starts with creating an unordered list and then applying the right CSS class to it. So let's go back to your course files. Okay, let's start with blank.html and let's save it as UL. UL for unordered list. OL of course is ordered list with numbers. Alright, now let's go back to your course files. Let's get some snippets over here, and I'm going to take the basic grid. I'm just going to copy over the basic grid. I'm going to go back to UI.html, and as usual, going to make the fonts larger. I'm going to create a split preview window. Okay, and let's get rid of the default stuff over here. Okay, I'm going to maybe leave the first paragraph, and I'm going to replace the rest with the default grid system. Okay, now let's change this to 6 just to make it look better. All right, so now let's start creating a list. As with all unordered lists, you start with UL, okay, and you end with a closing tag of UL as well. And for the list items, you start with LI and you close that as LI as well. And now you can add some content over here. Okay, or let me just put content here, and let me just copy this multiple times, okay, to have more content to work with. So the basic unordered list structure is right here, and now let's start adding some Bootstrap classes to it. Okay, the first example is to add the class of breadcrumb. Okay, and when you add the class of breadcrumb, automatically you can see the content is nicely laid out inline in a form to actually look like there's some kind of progression. So you start here, you go here, and this is where you are right now. Okay, so very easy to use breadcrumb. There's one more thing missing here. In order to properly syntax this to make it appear as if this is the content that you are viewing right now, we want to make the color of this slightly different, so you can go to LI, the final LI, and you can apply a class to it of active. And you can see the changes over here. So now this tells the visitor I started from this page and I went to this page and now I'm here. Okay, so very easy to create breadcrumbs. Now let's get rid of all the additional classes. Right, so you have your basic list item content over here, and now let's create a list group. So to do that, you can apply the class of list group. All right, now for this class, however, each list item also needs to have its own class. So the class for it will be list group item. Okay, so you can see the item nicely in here, and let's copy that to the rest of it. And there you have your basic list group item. Very useful to create a to-do list or to create any kind of list on your website. Alright, so as with list items as well, to tell the visitor the current item, you can apply the class to it of active. Alright, so this tells me that this is where I am, or this is the selection that I clicked on. Okay, and let's look at what other options are available for a list group item. Let's go here and type in list group. So we have list group item danger, list group item success, and those are some classes that you can apply, which is the same classes as your buttons, etc. So it highlights this particular list item in green, and success is to show some kind of a process that happened that is successful, or you can apply danger to it, which basically tells users, hey, don't click on this. Okay, let's get rid of the list group item active. Okay, so now let's remove all the styling for the list group item, and let's see another way that you can use the basic unordered list with Bootstrap, which is to create pagination. Alright, so the class for that will be ul class equals to pagination. Apply that pagination once. Alright, and you see your pagination items over here. Alright, and what's missing over here is to make it into a link. Okay. Okay, now you have your pagination item beautifully done over there. Let's copy this, replace this, replace this. Alright, so you have your pagination item. Let me do another one. Okay, and you're going to create previous, and here will be next. Okay, and you can add a font awesome class to it. You can refer to the lesson on font awesome. FA arrow circle left. Let's do that. Alright, and let's copy this to the next one. Change this to right. So here you have a very beautiful, very simple to use pagination. The users can just click on it, make sure that the list items contain a link in order for the proper CSS classes to be applied. Now again, with this you can always tell a user the current content that he is viewing or the current page that he's viewing by adding a list item class active. Alright, so when I'm looking at the pagination, I know that I'm here right now. I can click on previous, or I can click on this item, or I can click on next. Now you can make the pagination larger by going to the main UL, and after pagination space and type in pagination class large, and just like that you have a large pagination. You can make it into a really tiny pagination as well by adding pagination small. Alright, so with a basic list item, as I've explained in this video, you can create breadcrumbs, you can create list groups with list items, and you can also create pagination. Okay, in this tutorial I'm going to teach you how to use simple classes in Bootstrap to create labels, to create badges, wells, as well as alerts. So as usual, we'll start with the blank page in your course materials, blank.html, and I'm going to save this now as alerts. Okay, so let's start with the default text that you see over here. So let's start with wells. Wells are great to highlight certain parts of your content. It's not very outstanding compared to alerts, but it's useful anyway to just make a little bit of difference from the rest of the content, just to make the highlighted area a bit more noticeable. All right, let's create div class equals to well. Let's close that and close that div over here. Okay, so this is a well. Now let me change this to 6 just to make it easier for you to see in this video. Okay, so well, and there are two more classes that you can add to the well to control the sizing of the well, which is well LG for well large and well SM for well small. So essentially it looks identical. Okay, all the SM or LG does is control the amount of padding inside the well. Now let's try creating an alert. So alerts are of course much more obvious to your visitors or to your users, and they're typically used to signal that a certain action has been successful. You could also use it for, let's say, announcements, special offers, coupons, promos, or whatever you're doing, anything that you want to stand out or to make it stand out. So go to the div and now apply div class alert. Okay, and the alert is just the basic styling for all kinds of alerts, but now you need to select the type of alert. So let's type in alert. Okay, and you can see some of the options here: alert danger, alert info, alert link, alert success, alert warning. So let's select alert info. Okay, so here you have an alert, an info, typically used for providing additional information, and now for success. All right, alert success is if a user has done an action and it's been successfully completed. We use a lot of alerts. I use a lot of alerts when designing user application interfaces or UIs. Okay, now let's try one more, which is alert danger, and this is of course for highlighting some action or something on your site that requires extra attention or requires the user to be careful or to be a bit more cautious. Now, when you are linking any text in the alert, okay, let me link this word, the word slate over here. So a href equals to okay, so by default now you see that the link here is blue. Okay, but now that could be a problem here if you have used info. So when you use alert info, you see that the link is barely noticeable to your users. So there's a way to overcome that in Bootstrap. Is for the text or for links inside an alert, you may want to assign the class to the href tag class alert dash link. Okay, and what this does is that it bolds the linked text. It's also a different color from the rest of the text over here, and this is consistent if you change it to success. Okay, you can see that the color matches the rest of the success div element and the text as well. And if we change it to danger, okay. All right, so now let's talk about badges and labels. Let's start with a label. A label is typically used to, for example, display numbers, and labels and badges are typically used for different functions. Badges tend to be used for numbers. For example, if you want to display the number of unread messages in an application, and they are typically used more in web applications that use Bootstrap. So let me give you an example of a badge. So I'm going to just put a number here, 10. Okay, and to apply labels or badges, you need to use the span element. Span class equals to badge. Okay, and close this, close span tag. Okay, so it looks nice for a number. There are no additional classes for you to style badge in Bootstrap 3. So if you type in here badge again, there's just simply no additional classes for you to use. So the use case of badges is pretty limited. However, you can use labels. So labels can be used for all kinds of things. So labels work with the span tag as well. Well, actually you can assign the label class to any element you want, but the most common is to use span. Span class equals to label. Close that, and I'm going to close span tag. Okay, so now you see the label CSS applied, but we have only applied the basic label. Let me just put that in line, easier for you to see. Okay, we have only applied the basic label class. There is no color in this label, and labels come with 4 different colors, which is consistent throughout Bootstrap, which is label danger, default, info, primary, and success. Let's use label default. So you can see here the difference between a badge and a label. Labels have small rounded corners. Badges have more rounded corners. In fact, for a badge, if you were to put a single digit number in here, it's almost a full complete circle. So labels, you can apply label dash success to it. Okay, you can change this to info, you can change it to danger. Okay, you can apply this to, for example, if you have a table that displays the available tickets that you are selling. Okay, so you may want to highlight the sold out tickets with label danger. Well, let me give you an example from one of the user interfaces that I designed with Bootstrap 3 to show you how we can apply all the elements that I taught you here: wells, alerts, labels, and badges. So this is the user interface for Nichify. It's just a mock-up, however, and nothing really actually works. And I typically do a complete, fully designed user interface before we start working on the software for our company. And this helps everyone to understand what is required and avoid any wasted effort. Alright, so you see here a badge that I use for the word trial. Okay, and also here for the visits. This could be a, sorry, this is a label, and this is a label as well. This could be a badge, but there are just not many styling options for badges, so I prefer to use a label. Alright, now let's go to other aspects of the user interface. Okay, again I use a label here, and this is draft. So if I want to indicate that a page has been deleted, I could put label dash danger to it. And if I want to indicate a page that has been published, I could perhaps add label dash success, and drafts will be label dash default. And that's what it means by giving some contextual meaning to the labels. Now let's click on, alright, so here again I use labels. Let's go back home, manage. So the interesting thing to note here is that although what I'm showing you here looks like an actual application, but nothing really happens when you click on the buttons. Okay, well, some stuff happens, but buttons like delete page or whatever, none of that actually works. And it's amazing the amount of effort I've put in to actually design the complete user interface with Bootstrap 3. But trust me, it really helps. So if you're trying to develop a software, you're trying to get a freelancer to do something for you, a web-based application, use the skills that you learn in Bootstrap to design something like this until it looks almost 100% like the final or the end product that you want them to develop. If you do that, I guarantee that you will spend less money because you don't need to constantly correct the work of the developer, and you can show the developer, this is what I want, this is the end product, and now you have to make it work. Alright, so where was I? So examples of, okay, labels. Again, we use labels here. This is a well, and there are no alerts here for me to show you, but alerts typically can be, alright, so this is actually an alert, but it's been embedded into this panel. Anyway, I hope that this tutorial was helpful for you, where I've shown you how to use simple elements in Bootstrap like alerts, wells, badges, and labels. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how you can properly display code with the proper syntax within a page. So of course you see the HTML code over here, but what if you want to put the HTML code in the content area and make it very obvious that it's actually code instead of normal paragraph text? That's what we're going to be doing in this tutorial. So as usual, I'll start with blank.html, and I'm going to save it as code. So in Bootstrap, there are a few simple classes you can use. Let me change this column to 6, alright, to make it easier for you to see in this video. Alright, so I'm going to add some code inside the default sentence that is in your blank.html. Okay, so what if I want this HTML to be a code? Alright, now you see that this tag here, HTML, doesn't actually appear in the content at all, because in this editor, of course, it thinks this code is actually part of the source code instead of part of the content that you want to appear. So in order to solve that, you need to wrap this with another tag, which is code, and close it with a closing code attribute. Okay, so I'm going to type in HTML over here. Okay, so you can see in the preview window now it says a blank slate HTML for you to build quickly. Now the word or the letters HTML here look like it's part of the content, so users may mistake it for some kind of weird typo. So to add the proper syntax to inform your visitors that this is actually code that you're trying to inform them of, that this is a code, you need to add the attribute code and close that with dash code. Alright, so you see the proper syntax and formatting here, that this is how Bootstrap displays code. Now if your code is long, okay, if you have a long piece of code, you can also use the same code attribute. Okay, let me move this code to the beginning of the sentence. Okay, so for example, if this entire thing is a piece of code, I can do this, but there is another attribute that you can call by default in Bootstrap, which is pre, and close it with pre. So pre is more suitable when you want to highlight lines of code or several lines of code very easily. With pre, you can add a class to it, which is pre-scrollable, and that will add a sidebar, which you can't see here, but let me just duplicate this entire thing. Okay, there is another attribute that is used by Bootstrap, an HTML5 attribute, and this is to highlight or properly syntax keyboard functions. Okay, so for example, if I want to ask my visitors to press Command D or Control, okay, Control in their keyboard, I can add the attribute of KBD, which is short for keyboard, and close it with -KBD. So this puts the tag or the text in a black, sort of a black label. And now let's go to the Bootstrap website to see more examples of this. So in the Bootstrap website, you need to go to CSS and click on code, and you'll see more examples of how to use to indicate input that is entered via keyboard. And again, the code, and I've already shown you how to highlight inline code, okay, and also I've explained how to use pre for multiple lines of code. There are other types of formatting that you can use in Bootstrap. These are typically for more advanced purposes, and you don't really have to use the codes that you see here. It's useful for whenever someone is accessing your page via screen readers or some other applications built for specific purposes, but in most cases I don't think you will need to use the rest of them. Alright, so that's all for this tutorial, where I have explained how to properly highlight inline code as well as sections of code on your page using Bootstrap. In this video, I'm going to show you how to style and use tables with Bootstrap. So we're not going to be actually creating a table because that is a bit time consuming. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up blank.html, and then we're going to look at our snippets. We're going to click on table and copy the code for a very basic table. And in blank.html, I'm going to paste the table to replace the default text. Now I'm going to save this as tables. Okay, so let me get set up, creating a new preview window and making all the text larger. Let me change this to column MD8. Okay, so here you have your basic table in Bootstrap, and how that works is that if you were to create a table manually, this is how your table will look like without any styling in Bootstrap. So to start with the basic styling of tables in Bootstrap, you add the class of table to it. Alright, now there are other classes that you can add as well: table bordered, table condensed, table hover, table responsive, table striped, etc. So let's go through them one by one. Let's first use table bordered. Okay, So you need to apply the class table, which sets all the basic styling for the table, and table border is an additional class that adds only a specific style, which in this case is a border. So you can see that the table is fully there's a border on every single cell for this table. Now let's try another class, which is table striped. Okay, so I hope that you can see the difference here when you're watching this video, because the color differences may not be that obvious, but you can see that each alternate row in this table now has a very light gray color added to it. Okay, and that's what happens when you choose table stripe. Every alternate row, and that is happens automatically. You don't need to go to each row to assign any class to it. Okay, now let's look at another class, which is table hover. Okay, now for this class you may not notice any differences, but you would when you start to hover on any of the row. So just like table striped, except in this instance the light gray color is applied on the row that you happen to hover on. Okay, now let's look at another class, which is table condense. So what this does is that it removes some of the padding in between the cells in your table to make it just a little bit more condensed. Let's see if you can spot the difference. So this is the table condense, and this is the regular table without any condense. Alright, so the differences are there, and you may want to use a condensed table in some situations. In most cases, just a basic table style would do. So you can apply multiple styles for table. Let me start by adding a border to it. So I'm going to apply table dash bordered. Now my table is bordered, but I can also add table striped. Okay, and I can also add table hover. Okay, so now my table is bordered, it's striped, every alternate row is striped, but there's also a hover element that you see here. When I hover on some of the alternate rows, you can actually see that the color changes automatically. Okay, and of course you can also apply table condense. Alright, so now this table is a basic table in Bootstrap. It is not responsive, and this is one of the biggest problems with tables. So if this is the actual table that you're going to use, there's simply, after a certain screen size, for example, on a mobile phone, there's simply no way to save any space here. So what happens is that this table would break out of your page layout and ruin the responsive feel that is applied by default in Bootstrap, and there is no way to overcome this. But in Bootstrap 3 they have added another class, which is table responsive. Now in order to show you table responsive, let me change the column here to just 4. Okay, so this looks like it has resized itself, but you only really know when I add a background color. So let me add a background color of a let me choose something really bright. Okay, aqua. That will do. Okay, so now you can see that the row or the column actually ends here, and the table spills out of that column. So this is what will happen on a mobile device, for example, where this is the maximum screen width, and the table would spill out of your layout. So to make this table responsive in Bootstrap, let me collapse the entire table by clicking on full current block. So in Bootstrap, what you have to do is you have to apply a div and put this table inside that div, and let's call it div class table responsive. Okay, and let's close that div tag over here. Okay, so now the table is fully responsive. You can see the limits of the column MD4 is from this end to this end, and now with the responsive div, it fits perfectly in these in the small space that you see here. Some of the tags appear to be missing. So this is how it works in Bootstrap for table responsive. You have to swipe if you are in a on your mobile phone. You have to swipe from left to right. So there's a scroll bar at the bottom, if you can see. Okay, so this is how Bootstrap makes a table responsive. Okay, and let's change that to column MD2 for an extreme example. Right, and now by default the user would only see these two columns here, and he can scroll, okay, from left to right to view the other information. This may not be the optimal way to do this, but tables are always a big issue with responsive layouts. Okay, tables are rigid, and I think this is one of the best ways to do it. Of course, in the other tutorials, I will show you how to display different tables to your user depending on the screen size. So if they are on a desktop, you can show them this table, for example. Okay, but if they are on a mobile phone or on a tablet, you can actually create a separate table, and in that table you can reduce the number of columns, because basically the columns are what makes the table rigid and, you know, breaks out of your containing div element here. So in the other tutorials, I'll show you how to create a separate table and show that table for mobile devices, and in that table you can actually maybe reduce the number of columns. You can test a few variations to find what you want. But anyway, this is the basic of using tables and styling tables in Bootstrap. In this lesson, we're going to create panels. Now, panels are a very useful element in Bootstrap that allows you to separate content into small little widgets that once it's in the panel, it's very easy to move that content around. Now, in the template that I've given you, there are examples of panels. Okay, for example, this right here, the content right here is in a panel. The panel does not have much styling to it, but it is in a panel. And the price table or the pricing table that you see here, each individual package or plan, this is also in a panel. Now, panels are used sometimes in the main website or in the sales page of your website, but in applications you see panels a lot. So this is a user interface that I've designed using Bootstrap, and this is for our web application Link Tracker, which is an ad tracking platform at linktracker.com. Here you can see panels. Panels are everywhere over here. Okay, so the reason we put all this content into panels is that it will be very easy to copy the entire panel, put it somewhere, or in the actual application you can make these panels movable, so the user can just click on this panel and drag it somewhere else. Okay, so now let's start creating panels in Bootstrap. Let's go to Coda and click on your course materials over here. Click on your project, and now let's start with blank. And I'm going to save this blank, save as, I'm going to save it as panels. Okay, and we need the basic grid structure to start with, so I am going to go to snippets. I'm going to open up grid, and I'm going to copy the entire thing over here, and I'm going to come back to panels. Well, let me make the text larger. Okay, I'm going to open a preview window at the bottom so that we can see what we're working with instantly. And now I want to get rid of this blank slate, of course, so I'm going to delete this entire thing and paste the basic structure to create a row and to create 12 columns. Okay, so 12 columns are a bit too large to work with, so I'm going to change this to 4. And now let's get rid of hello world. So inside this column, we are going to create a panel. So let's start with creating the basic panel. I'm going to type div class panel. Okay. Alright, and let's close that tag over here. So we have created a panel, and let's add some content. Okay, so you probably can't see much over here. So with panels in Bootstrap, there are a few styling options that you can apply the panel to. Now let me just use one of the basic options, which is panel default. Okay, so this is the default panel, and now you can see a border, and that is much easier to work with. Let me just enter a paragraph tag over here to make it easier for you to see the panel. Alright, so now it's much easier to see. So what's the problem with this panel? The text is too close to the edge, and this is why in Bootstrap you have to create the panel body div tag. So I'm going to div class panel body. Okay, and I'm going to close that div. So now you can see the content is very nicely placed inside the panel. There's some padding all over the panel, and all the content of the panel should go inside panel dash body. Okay, so now let's create a heading for that panel, and we will collapse the panel body to make it easier to work with. You can just you can right click or double tap and click on fold current block, or you can also click here at the correct line number. So this is line 62. I'm going to click on line 62, and that will collapse this tag. Now let's create the heading. Div class panel heading. Okay, that's the one, and let's close that tag. Okay, so the panel heading appears not inside the panel body. It appears or you should put it before the div panel body. Alright, and now let's add a title. Okay, so you see the panel title over here. But in Bootstrap, there's an additional class that you can apply to title to make it look just a little bit better for the title. You can of course just bold this text if you want to, and it works well. But let me just go through the example here, and let me create another div for div title. Okay, so I'm going to create div class panel title. That's the one we're looking for. Let's close that tag, and let's close div title. So now you have a panel with the panel title and panel body. So next step is to add a panel footer. But first, let's collapse panel heading to make the code a little bit easier to work with. So you see the main panel over here, and first thing is the panel heading, and inside panel heading there'll be a div class for panel title. Then comes panel body, and now we're going to create the footer. That is div class panel footer. Okay, let's close that div, and let's add some content. Alright, so you have panel title, body, and footer. So how do you normally use this stuff? Okay, so for panel title, of course, it's the title of the panel. Let me make this a bit more realistic. Okay, so let me create let me put the title here as latest news. Okay, now for the panel footer, you can put anything you want, but in most cases a button would go really well over here. A button or some kind of link or anything else that you want. Everything else you should probably put it inside the panel body area. Now let's talk about styling the panels. So without any kind of styling, the panel would look like this when it's just panel. Okay, this can be useful in some situations, but in most cases you would need to start off with at least panel default to make the panel just more visible and to make it look like an actual widget. Okay, now let's apply a different style to it, and in Bootstrap there are 4 classes that by the function of those classes. So just like buttons, you have button default, button info, button success, button warning, and button danger. So panels are basically named after the same classes as well. So default, and then now we have info. Okay, so what this does is it changes the panel heading color and the border. Panel footer colors, however, do not change at all no matter what class that you have applied. Now let's go to panel success. Okay, it's green. Panel warning, that's orange or yellow or whatever, and panel danger. Okay, so with all those classes, it depends how you want to use them. For example, for an announcement, you may want to use panel danger just so that it stands out a little bit more from all the other panels out there. Or you can apply this to an error class. So for example, if you put a form in here and the user did not fill up some of the fields in the form and try to submit it, then you can change the class to panel. That is a bit more advanced in terms of application. So for the default use, you can just determine what you want to use. Just stick to panel default if you're not sure. Now as for the content, you can create a paragraph tag. Okay, and you can put in paragraph, you can put lists in here, you can even put a form in here. Let's give that a shot and see what happens. Now I'm not going to create a form in this tutorial. I'm just going to copy a ready-made form, okay, or maybe a table. Okay, so I'm going to take this ready-made table over here, and I'm going to get back to panels. Okay, and now I'm going to delete everything inside panel, inside panel body. Okay, I'm going to delete this content inside panel body, and I'm going to paste the table in here. Okay, now let's collapse the table. It's too much to, okay, collapse the table. All right, so this panel is obviously too small for this table, so let me change it to 8 columns. Okay, it looks great. Now a very neat trick, if you want your table to occupy the entire panel body without any padding over here, then you can just remove the div class panel body. Let's do that and see what happens. I'm going to delete div class panel body, and now the table is full width. All right, so let's try that with some other type of content. Let's try that with a form. Yep, let's try that with a form. Okay, basic form. I'm going to go back to panels. I'm going to delete the table, and I'm going to put in a form. All right, so here you can see the form appears very nicely. In this case, we would want to maintain the panel body to give it a slight padding. And then you have your submit button here, and you can always move the submit button to the footer area, or you can even delete the footer. So that's all for this lesson on how to use panels in Bootstrap. Okay, as you can see in the sample template that I've included in your course materials, there is a section here where there is a responsive video and a responsive map as well as a responsive table. As far as the table is concerned, that will be covered in a separate lecture. So in this video, in this lecture, I want to talk about how to add a responsive video or a responsive map to your website. Okay, so let's get started and let's move on. Let's open Coda. Let's open the course materials. All right, and let's start with blank as usual, and I will save this as well, I'll save it as video. Okay, and let's open the snippets. I'm going to copy the basic grid structure because I really need the grid structure to show you how a responsive video would behave. I'm going to split the screen and I'm going to make the fonts bigger. Oops, not here, right here. Okay, I'm going to swap this for the actual grid. Okay, and let's create column MD3, and I am going to give this column a background color. You don't have to do this, but I just want to show you how a responsive video would work. Background color. Okay, let's pick aqua. Great. Now let's go to YouTube, or it also works with Vimeo. Alright, so this is my YouTube account, and you're probably wondering why YouTube is suggesting that I watch all these cartoons. Well, the answer is quite obvious, because my daughter has just watched all of this, I think, in a day using my iPad. So that's what I get in my YouTube account, just cartoons, and some stuff from Oprah Winfrey, which is my wife. So now this is the stuff that I like. Okay, let's take a guitar lesson from YouTube. Okay, great. Let's make that smaller. Okay, so now to share a video, to embed a video, you just click on share and then click on embed. Okay, so by default YouTube would probably suggest a different size here. Okay, click on show more, and YouTube would probably be suggesting 640 by 360, and that's fine. You can just copy the entire code, Command A, copy that, and let's get back to Coda. Okay, and here I'm going to paste the video code. Alright, and you can see here. Alright, let me put column MD6. That's too small. 8. Alright, so you can see the size of the column over here, and you can see the video. Now, what happens when someone views your video in a mobile device? And this is the beautiful thing about Coda, is that you can preview how it look like in a mobile device. Alright, what you do is click on this little icon at the bottom here, and under user agent, select either iPad or iPhone. Okay, so I'm going to select Safari iOS 7 iPhone, and that gives me a preview of, well, it doesn't really look like an iPhone, it looks more like an iPad, but whatever. You can see what I'm trying to say here. The video actually spills out of the screen, and therefore in an actual iPhone or iPad or mobile device, it would not scroll very smoothly, and in fact you'll be able to scroll from side to side because the video pushes the rest of the page content out of the area that you want it to be within. Yeah, just in case that wasn't really obvious. Alright, so now how do we make this into a responsive video? Alright, so in Bootstrap you got to use div class embed responsive. All right, so you can see some of the options here. You got to click on embed responsive, and right after the iframe we're going to close that class. And now in the iframe you need to add another class here, embed responsive item. This is the one. Okay, and if this is a 16:9 video or widescreen format, you also need to add embed responsive 16:9. If it's a more traditional or older format video that is not wide, then you can choose embed responsive 4:3. All right, and now that works. So you can see now the column 8 column, when it's collapsed to mobile, is just a single column, but you can see the column stretches from end to end of this iPad or iPhone screen, but the video itself will automatically adjust according to the size. If just to make sure of that, let's go back and let's choose iPod Touch or something smaller. Okay, or let's choose iPad, and this is a bigger screen. All right, so you can see the video itself will automatically resize. Now let's go back to the default browser, and here you have your responsive video. So if I were to change this column to column MD4, the video will automatically resize, and you can see since I've highlighted the column using a very obvious bright aqua color, so you can see actually where the column starts and the column ends, and it's perfect right in the middle. All right, so now how do you add a responsive map? It works exactly the same way as I showed you here. All right, so instead of trying to do this again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to collapse this tag here, full current block. All right, and I'm going to copy this entire thing, or actually I'm going to copy the entire div. I'm going to duplicate that. Okay, I'm going to change this to 6. I'm going to change this to 6. Alright, so the basic structure here is the same. The class is the same for a map, embed responsive 16:9, and you have to add the class embed responsive item inside the iframe. Now the only question is, how do you actually put the Google map into it? Alright, so let's select any location. So this is where I am now, just in case you're a stalker and you want to come and see me somewhere. Alright, so select, let's put my office address. Okay, so this is my office address here, right here, and I want to embed this map here. So alright, you go all the way to the bottom of Google Maps. There's a small icon here with the icon of a cog or gear. Click on that and click on share or embed map. Alright, now Google will ask you for some size over here. Where does it specify the size? Right, 600 by 450, and that is the medium size. That will do for now. I will copy that, and I will go back to Coda, and I will swap the video with the Google map. Bam, the Google map is right there. But remember to add the class embed responsive item. Alright. Alright, so there you go. A responsive embed for YouTube video, Vimeo video, and also Google Map. Now let's check this out again in a smaller screen like an iPhone. And both these items will collapse automatically beautifully like this, simply because you have added the right CSS classes, which is already in Bootstrap, to make sure that your videos will look good no matter what the screen size is. Okay, in this video I'm going to show you how to create simple tabs and pills in Bootstrap using a very basic element in HTML, which is the unordered list. So I'm not going to show you how to create an unordered list because I've covered that in previous lessons. I'm just going to go to the snippets under your project files, and I'm going to swipe from the snippets over here a basic unordered list. Now I'm going to open up blank.html and I'm going to save this as tabs. Alright, and I'm going to create a split preview window as usual. Make everything larger, makes it easy for you to see. And now I'm going to paste the basic unordered list over here. So this is your basic unordered list, and now to change that into a tab, all you need to do is go to the UL element and add a class of nav to it, and that creates a basic nav item that you can add your own styles to. But what we're looking for is the tabs, so go to and type in nav-tabs. Okay, so here you have your basic tab over here, and it spans the border at least spans from end to end of the 12 columns. I'm going to change this to 4 columns, which makes it easier for me to show you what's happening in this video. Alright, so you have 3 items. You have your nav tabs. Now when you're using tabs, you'd want to show your visitors which is the active tab or the current tab that they're looking at. So to do that, you can go to any list item and add the class of active to it. If there is a particular tab that you want to disable and not allow anyone to click on it, then you can go to li and add the class of disable to it. So now when you mouse over the disabled item, okay, by default you will see an icon over here, and this is, since I'm on a Mac, I can see this icon that says no entry or do not click on this item. Alright, so now with nav tabs, you can also add another class to it, which is nav-justified, to make the list items of equal width and also make it span from end to end. But this time, let me change the columns width to 6, but this time not only is the border span end to end, but also all the list items will automatically adjust in terms of width in order to fill up the entire containing div or element. In this case, it's column MD6. Alright, so now let's talk about creating pills. In terms of appearance, pills and nav tabs look a little bit different, but the function is still the same. Allows you to easily separate or divide your content into smaller chunks. Okay, so now let's get started with pills, and you apply the class nav as you would with the tabs, but for pills you apply another class which is nav pills. So pills looks like a button over here, and all the other classes can also be used for pills, which is class active and class disable. So with pills you can also add nav justified to your pills. You can see the changes there. So now it has taken up the entire space of the containing div element. Now with pills, there is one more way you can style the pills, which is to make the items stack up on top of one another. To do that, add the class of nav-stacked. And now you can see the difference. So this looks like your typical sidebar layout, or you'd see styling like this in an application menu, etc. So since the nav is stacked, it will also automatically fill up the entire div element. So if I change the column width to 3, and you can see the changes there. If I change the column width to 12, also it fills up the entire containing element or containing div. Okay, so in this video I showed you how to create basic nav pills and nav tabs. But this is basically just the menu items on top. How about the content? I will cover that in the next tutorial, where I'll show you how to create content for each of these list items and actually automatically show that content whenever the user would click on any of these items. Okay, so we're going to continue in this tutorial from the previous tutorial, where I have explained how to create tabbed items like this. Now the tab items do not have content and nothing much happens when you click on them. This is still useful. You can still link any of these items to a place on a separate place or div on your page, or you can link it to an external site that opens in a new browser window when someone clicks on it. But now we're going to complete the part on tabs by actually adding content for each of the list items here and making sure that when someone clicks on the list items, you'll be showing them the item that is related to that particular list. Now to do that, you'll need to give this ordered list an ID. Okay, so let's call this as my tabs. Now let's collapse this entire block. Click on fold current block. Okay, so the navigation of the tabs, that part is pretty much done. Now we're talking about the content of it. So to create the content of your tabs, create a new div and apply the class of tab content. Let's close that div. And now all the content will go inside this div class for tab content. And for the individual items, we will need to add the div class of tab-pane. Okay, and now in order to make this work, each tab pane must also have an ID. So I'm going to give it a very simple ID. You can name it whatever you want. I'm going to call it item 1, and I'm going to add some content in item 1. Alright, so this is the basic tab pane over here. Now in order to activate that, you need to go to the corresponding list item, okay, and make sure that this list item is linked to this div with the ID of item 1. Okay, so now it's linked, and since we have 3 items here, I'm going to duplicate the tab pane. I'm going to copy and paste it 2 times, and I'm going to change the second one to item 2 and item 3. And okay, and for the second list item, I'm going to remove the class of disabled. I'm going to link it to div ID item 2, and the third for div ID item 3. Alright, so now the basic structure is done. The first link here would link to the first part of your content, which is under the div item 1 with the class of tab pane. Second links to div ID item 2, and the third list item link will link to div ID item 3. Now it doesn't seem to work, however, because in order to use the functionality of tabs that actually displays the content, you would need to add the HTML5 data attribute to each of these list items here. And to do that, go to the href tag over here, and right after this type in data dash toggle equals to tab. Alright, and now you can copy that, apply it to the other links as well. Okay, now let's test it out. Alright, so Now you can see list item 1, list item 2, list item 3, and the corresponding content when it's clicked on. However, if you notice earlier that by default, although I have put this first list item with the class of active, but really there's no content being shown there by default. This is because I need to specify, of the 3 tab panes that I have here, I need to specify which tab pane will be visible by default. To do that, right after tab dash pane, I can add active, and now you see content of item 1 here shown by default. And when I click on list item 2, I see content of item 2. List item 3, I see content of item 3. So as for the content of the tabs themselves, you can test adding any kind of content that you want over here. Again, the snippets files are very useful. So let's try map, responsive map. I'm going to go back to tabs. So I'm going to add responsive map to item div ID item 2. Okay, and I'm going to select something else. So I'm going to select video. I'm going to put video on the tab pane ID 3. Okay, and let's see what else can I use. I'm going to select some list icons, and I'm going to put it in the main content area, which is div ID item 1. Okay, so now you have your tab items over here. Let's click on them. It works perfectly. It's a bit too small, so you may want to change this to column MD6. Okay, now there's one more class you can put into your tab to make it have just a little bit better effect, which is to type in right after tab dash pane, you can type in fade. Okay, and that adds the fade effect to this particular tab pane. I'm going to add fade again here. Okay, and for the active tab pane, I'm going to add fade, but I'm also going to add in, okay, to tell Bootstrap that this tab should be loaded by default. Okay, now let's look at a simple effect here and see how it works like. Right, so you can see a slight fade effect here. If you pay attention to it, you can see a slight fade in, fade out kind of effect that wasn't there before. So this is how you create a simple tab item, and again you can change this to tab pills very easily. It still works great. And if you look at the template files that I've given you, that's exactly how you accomplish this little thing over here. So in fact, in this tutorial I've shown you almost exactly how to create something that looks like this.